Okay guys, so here's the modifications that I made to this old outboard leg to be able to use Briggs Stratton pressure washer engine on top. Now this thing is not rated for horsepower. Yeah, this is the foot-pounds. Let's see, 7.75 foot-pounds gross torque, and it's 175 cc. But that come off a pressure washer, and I had an old Johnson leg I picked up at an auction for like 25 bucks, but the power head was no good, and I wasn't going to stick a bunch of money into a 54 Johnson power head with the dual fuel setup and the whole bit. So I picked that engine up for 20 bucks at flea market, and the modifications that I had to make, the biggest thing you got to do is this mount. Okay, this is, I mean, depending on your engine, you know, you're going to have to do something to get the bolts from here to jive with the bolts up here. So I'm kind of fortunate enough, I've got a little welder and some scrap iron. I made myself a mount there. The shaft on this, I can't remember, I want to say it was a 1-inch shaft on the engine. So I took a 3/8 inch drive deep well socket that was just big enough to slide over, and drilled a hole in it and bolted it with, that's a grade 2 bolt, you know, cheapest stuff you can get at Tractor Supply. It's real soft. So that's a shear bolt. If anything ever happens crazy, hopefully that bolt will break before anything else does. The other end of that drive, like I said, it's a 3/8 drive, and I've got the lower unit off in the vise here because I just put a new seal kit in it. This head was roughly square. It was kind of rounded and flat on 4 sides, and that was okay for the old power head because it sat in there, and the two surfaces were machined just so they all jive together. So it was kind of rounded off square. That's what the corners were, just rounded off square. Now the 3/8 drive worked in it, and I've taken this out on the water before. But when I pulled it apart to do the seals in the lower unit, I realized that I was getting a lot of wear because those corners were rounded off, so they didn't engage that 3/8 square drive socket very well. So what I did was, again, took my welder and laid a bead on all the corners that were factory rounded off. I laid a bead there and then went to the bench grinder and file and made that head now, it's going to be hard to see, that head now is square. So that's going to engage that 3/8 drive a lot better. So I shouldn't have any issues with that anymore. This thing was so old, like I said, I picked it up at an auction for like 25 bucks. The seals were bad in the lower unit, and when I've had it out on the water, I come back, check my gear oil, and it's full of water, you know, milky white stuff. So the modifications that I had to do on this to make it work, again, because it was so old, this propeller is held on, should be held on by a cotter pin right here, and then that cotter pin is held on by a little rubber plug that covers that all up and makes it look real nice and everything. Well, my plug was all crap, you know, because it's 50-some years old, and so this, you know, I can't use my plug anymore. So that means that the cotter pin wouldn't work, you know, because, or it's not a cotter pin, I'm sorry, it's a shear. That little brass round pin down there, that pin was held in by the rubber. Well, since that rubber won't go on there, that pin just slides in and out, and I thought about using a cotter pin, and that wasn't really strong enough for me. So again, I used a grade 2, cheap grade 2 with a Tef nut bolt. I drilled that bigger, just stuck my drill on there, and you know, it already had a hole, so I just enlarged the hole, and I had to gash that just a little bit with a bench grinder on the edge of the prop to make the bolt head sit down in there. So I mean, it's not the prettiest thing in the world, but it's working real well now. So as I turn this, you can hear that down in there turning. I've got the transmission in neutral. Well, no, there it goes. Anyhow, I've been messing around with that shift rod. You pull up and down on that shift rod, and that's how you get your gears to work. But there are plenty of videos on YouTube on how to do the seals in this thing. That little brass bushing right there hides a rubber O-ring. That's the biggest pain in the ass of the whole deal is getting that bushing out without destroying it. Most of the videos will show you to drill it, or excuse me, just to tap it and run a bolt in it and pull it out and then buy a new bushing and drive the new bushing in. I figured out a way to drill up from the inside with a 5/16 drill, and I made a video about that, so I'll post that. But anyhow, I drilled the housing and then knocked that bushing out, and I was able to save that bushing and reuse it. So, you know, that saved me waiting on a part, because I didn't even realize I needed that. You know, I would have needed that. So I tried to do this on the cheap. I mean, I tried to do this whole thing on the cheap. The kit, the lower unit seal kit, there's I got this from, I think it's like vintageoutboard.com, something like that. But the kit worked out great. It had everything in it I need, and you know, it's got a gasket around here. There's a gasket. There's a seal under here. This is the water pump. That's the other mod that I made. I pulled the water pump impeller out of there. Because that engine is air cooled, I don't want water squirting up. So like, if I wouldn't have pulled the pump out, this tube engages another tube that runs up into the power head, and I would have water squirting up into my engine. I don't want that, so I took the water pump out. But underneath that water pump is a seal. There's that O-ring under that. That's a seal, and that's what keeps water from getting into your gear case, because this is all submerged underwater. So anyhow, that's roughly what I had to do to get this thing to work. And like I said, I'm trying to do this all on the cheap. I got 20 bucks in the power head. I think I got 25 in the leg. I got like 20 or 25 in the seal kit, and everything else I kind of had laying around. I probably had to buy a bolt or two, but I'm kind of a pack rat, so I keep a lot of junk. The throttle cable, this thing should not have a throttle on it. The pressure washer, you know, when it's manufactured, I guess you just start it up and it runs, and it's got a governor spring assembly. I did have to modify that, but this is a brake cable off a bicycle, an old junk bicycle that a lady was throwing away that I got off of her. So I used the bike brake cable, and you can see it working the throttle down in there. It works real good. This thing was on the back of my 14-foot John with all the same crap that I always haul around. I've got a factory produced Briggs Stratton outboard. My factory Briggs Stratton outboard will push that boat with all my junk and me in it at about 8 miles an hour, and it vibrates really bad. You know, people bitch about those Briggs that, you know, they're super loud. Man, every outboard is loud. I don't get that, you know, but the thing with the Briggs is it vibrates really bad. So it pushes at 8 miles an hour. I took that off and I put this Frankenstein deal on it one day just out of curiosity, and it pushes at 9 miles an hour, and it's smooth as silk. I mean, I could not believe I wasn't getting any vibration out of this thing, because I really expected all that linkage and shit to rattle, and it's actually a lot smoother than my factory Briggs. So, you know, I got like maybe $100 in the whole deal, and it pushes it faster, it's smoother than my factory Briggs outboard. So, you know, this is, you know, it looks like kind of junk, but it's cool. You know, I did it myself. I took it out. The first time I took it out, I had people at the boat ramp checking it out. You know, oh man, I always wanted to do something like that. So, you know, it just took some tinkering. But that's it. If you got any questions or anything, you know, leave them in the comments, and I'll answer, you know, whatever I can. So that's putting like a 54 Johnson leg on an old pressure washer engine.